Today we're cooking every cut of pork rib there is. Which means I'm going to show you exactly which cuts there are, where to get them, and how to cook them.
Big thanks to Kamado Joe for sponsoring this episode.
Yesterday I went to my good friend Gert-Jan van der Horst and he had some beautiful pigs hanging. And that was a good opportunity to show you the difference between pieces of pork ribs. Because in Europe there's some misunderstanding of which cut is actually the spare rib. In this tray I've got all the cuts that you can take out of the rib side of the pig. We're going to take a close look at them one by one and I'm going to show you where they come from and how they're butchered. The first one is the most popular one in my home country, the Netherlands. This is the baby back rib and we like them with a little bit of meat on top of them. Look at that. Now to get a beautiful big baby back rib like this, the butcher cuts the ribs in half. Then he takes off the front end, removes the loin, and you end up with this. Now that front end is actually also a style of ribs. Even though this might look like a chunk of nothing special, this is actually called the country style ribs. And this is the part that the butcher took off and sawed off the excess bones and you ended up with this beautiful chunk. And you're lucky if you can find plenty of these because they are a real treat. And then of course you have the belly left over. And from the belly you get these beautiful ribs. Because all the butcher needs to do is trim the excess meat off the bones and then you end up with this. Now this is actually called the spare rib. But if you order spare ribs in the Netherlands, you get this.
Because somebody somewhere along the line
made the mistake and called this a spare rib, so all of the cuts kinda got lost in translation. Now the only cut that I haven't showed you yet is the St. Louis style cut. To turn the spare ribs into a St. Louis style rib, I'm just gonna square it up. I'm going to look for the knuckle and the cartilage at the big bones and then take my knife, get it cleaned up, squared up. And then what you're left with are the rib tips. Now I did a video on the rib tips a while ago. Now of course since I have them here we'll put them in the video. Now, of course if the butcher is focused on baby back ribs then you're gonna get these more beautiful looking baby back ribs like we are in the Netherlands. But if they're focused on the St. Louis style cut ribs or the spare ribs, they're gonna get smaller baby back ribs and a larger St. Louis style cut rib. But that all depends on the preference of the butcher. Now let's get these ribs prepared and on the barbecue. With the baby back ribs, you're going to take your regular dinner knife and wiggle it underneath the membrane. And then all you need to do is stick your finger underneath and just lift it off and the membrane is off. Now with the St. Louis style cut ribs, it's a little different. With the St. Louis style cut rib, you want to find your little start at one side and yank it off. And with the countryside ribs, the membrane is so small, we're just going to forget about that. Now let's get these seasoned up. For my seasoning, I'll be using the PITMASTERX pork rub. Now this is a classic barbecue rub infused with European style pork flavors. And I tell you, you might want to give it a try. Now the recipe is on our website, of course. So if you're unable to buy the jar, you can always make it yourself. No excuses. Of course, with the country style ribs, you want to over season it a little bit. It has a thicker piece of meat on it. And with the St. Louis style cut of ribs, it's completely different. It is a thin layer of ribs, so you want less seasoning on it. You don't want the seasoning to overpower. There we go. You still need to be able to taste the actual ribs. Now the baby back ribs have a lot of fat and plenty of meat on them. Especially if they're not cut like a waist, but as the prime product. So then you're gonna end up with these beautiful, thick baby back ribs. And that's the cool thing, if you're working with your hometown butcher and not buying at wholesale stores, you can actually ask him to cut it a certain way for you. So if you're a baby back rib guy, then you're gonna focus on the baby back ribs. And if you're a St. Louis style cut rib guy, then you're gonna ask for a larger St. Louis style cut. And if he doesn't understand what you're telling him, just show him this video. He'll understand then. These are some beautiful looking baby back ribs. Wow. Now that we got all the ribs seasoned up, it's time to fire up the Kamado Joe Big Joe 3. And this thing is a beast. And you can see it sits in my new outdoor kitchen from Fry. If you want to learn more about this outdoor kitchen, I'll put a link down below in the video description. But so far, I am enjoying it. And since it's a big barbecue, it's going to take a little bit more charcoal. And I'm going to put in 2 fire starters, where I normally put 1 fire starter in for a low and slow cook. Well, let me just light these up I'm gonna open up the bottom vent. I'm staying close to the grill because once the fire starters are burned up, this thing is going to raise up to high temperatures. And I want to prevent that because we do a low and slow cook. For smoking, I'm going to put in a chunk of cherry wood. That's going to give me some strong smoke flavors, but it's going to work really well with pork. I'm also going to put in the heat deflectors and the grill grates. Then in goes the ribs. First, the rib tips, the St. Louis style cut ribs, the baby back ribs, and the country style ribs. Rib side down for all of them because we got indirect heat, but we got the heat coming from down below, so the ribs will protect the meat from drying out. Now I'm gonna close the lid, set the top vent to the first stripe, the bottom vent to half a finger open, and the Kamado Joe is going to do the rest of the work for me while I clean this up. Look at that! The ribs are close to being done cooking. Of course, they won't cook evenly because they are different in size. So one will cook faster than the other, but there's still a little bit of time before they're done. And I love basting sauces because they're super easy to make. And all you need to think about is how to produce a little bit of acidity and how to add a little bit of flavor to the ribs. Not too much, don't go crazy, just a way to balance out the fattiness of the ribs. I'm gonna start with a 1/4 cup of ketchup, followed by a 1/4 cup of apple cider vinegar. Oh, it's a new bottle. It's a new bottle. Imagine opening this if you're drunk. I just take the knife out every time. About 3 tablespoons of this delicious Jack Daniel's fire, and then a tablespoon of Worcester sauce. Worcester sauce is like the magic sauce that makes everything taste like barbecue sauce. Screw the cap on, give it a couple of good shakes, and now this goes onto the ribs. Now for the last part, I'm just gonna close the lid, let the rest steam off. I'm gonna open the top vent a little bit to let that moisture out. And in the meantime, we're gonna keep our eye on the temperature. And once one of those sections of ribs hits a core temperature of 92 degrees Celsius, we're gonna take them off. The first ribs to be done are the rib tips. It's the end of the spare rib that we took off to create the St. Louis style ribs. That color came from a little bit of that sauce. Of course, it was good looking, but now it is absolutely perfect. I'm gonna take this off and let the rest to continue to cook. With the rib tips, I'm gonna roll this up. Now normally, with ribs coming off the barbecue being hot, I will give them a few minutes to relax a little bit. That might just be too much and you might overcook it. That is exactly what you're looking for, because if the rib tips overcook, they kind of fall apart and all of those little bits of cartilage just fall off and you got yourself a good piece of nibble, barbecue nibble. Now we gotta wait some more. Wait some more. Next up are the St. Louis style ribs. Ooh, almost at the breaking point. Almost. Let's take them off. Give them a good rest. Oh, and if you want to know, the baby backs are way behind. We're going to need at least another 5 degrees Celsius, which is about 10 degrees Fahrenheit. The thicker the meat, the longer it has to cook. It's going to be so good. 5 minutes, then we just wrap it up. Time to take the baby back ribs off. My favorites. And they look as beautiful as ever. Oh, careful now. And you see the basting sauce dried up and caramelized on those ribs, and just left a layer of juiciness and flavor without being a puddle of sauce. I'm gonna give them the same opportunity to rest, and then we have this little one left here. That's right. Country style ribs. Need a little longer. And when about 15 minutes later, the final rib is done, I have patience, man. Whoa. And this too gets a fair amount of rest before it's done. Honestly, the thicker the rib is, the longer you have to rest it. This is going to get the longest rest while we take a look at the rest of the rib. And I'm most excited about the comparison. How will they stand up to each other? Who's going to be the juiciest? Who's going to be the most tender? Because they were all cooked to 92 degrees Celsius. They all had plenty of time to rest. So it's a fair battle. But which one is going to be the best? Before we do this, you're going to put in the timestamp of this video, and then you're going to say what you think the one's going to be the best. The rib tips, the St. Louis style, the baby back, or the country style ribs. And then we'll check back at the end of the video and see if you change your mind and put that in the rest of the comments. All right. Oh, this looks delicious. You can see that by the weight of itself, it's already starting to tear and crack, so it's absolutely tender. We got a nice color on all of these ribs, by the way, so Let's just slice into this. Ooh, nice and tender. Oh, look at that. Whoa, look at how juicy they are. Though not everybody likes them because they have a lot of cartilage in them, but the juiciness is just really, really good. That is tasty. Time to test the St. Louis style cut of ribs. Look at this monster size of ribs. Now, just for the size alone, you would love these ribs. They just look so impressive. Let's get a slice of this. You can see that they're not as juicy as the rib tips because there's not a real thick layer of fat on them, and therefore you're not gonna get that juiciness and tenderness. We got a smoke ring. This looks good and tasty. Let's give them a bite. The amount of flavor to ratio to meat is really, really good. But you do have a lot of seasoning, and that combines really well. And for competitions, this is a must-have. Look at that. Clean off the bone. I can tear this off. It looks so good. Oh. The baby back ribs, these are my favorites. They gotta win. Just looks so juicy. Look at this. If I squeeze the top part here, there's just so much fat on this. It's insane. A nice pull away from the bone. Now that is what I like. Juiciness, meat, loads and loads of meat and loads of juiciness. There's just so much more meat on this than if you compare it to the St. Louis style cut ribs. It's almost like you get double the amount of meat. Oh, they're so good. I just love that bit of fat that sits in the meat. It is the ultimate rib for me. Man, this stuff's so good. Well, all right, the last piece, the country style ribs. Oh, the meat runs in the direction of the bone. That's why it looks a little bit drier, but if you push it, you can see there are loads and loads of juices. We got a nice smoke ring on this. Still a little bit hot, but it's full of the bone tender. Ow, hot. Oh, come on. Don't do me like that. I want my baby backs to win. But honestly, it can't compare to the baby back ribs because of the amount of fibers of the meat that run in the same direction. There's just a little bit more chewing involved. I must say that if I cooked the St. Louis style ribs in a different way with Texas crutch, wrap it in foil after like an hour or 2 hours, I could have gotten it a little bit more juicier. But still, in comparison, I think the baby backs, they definitely win. Let me know what you think and see you next time. Bring my babies back. Bring my baby backs.